The text arrived on a Tuesday evening as I was peeling off my scrubs after a 12-hour shift in the ER. I remember the exact moment because my hands were still trembling slightly from the adrenaline of saving a car accident victim. The screen lit up with my husband's name, and for a brief moment, I smiled. Then I read the message. Mom says Thanksgiving is going to be family only this year. She thinks it would be best if you visited your parents instead. I stared at those words, reading them over and over, the hospital's antiseptic smell still clinging to my skin as the meaning sank in. Family only. But I was family. I had been married to Mike for nearly 3 years. Or at least, I thought I was family. That's when I realized what Patricia Anderson really meant. Anderson family only. Old money. Proper connections. The right background. And despite the gold band on my finger, I would never truly qualify. My name is Jessica Miller, and this is the story of how my wealthy in-laws banned me from their Thanksgiving table, told me I wasn't their kind of person, and how everything changed when they finally met my parents. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The first time I met Patricia Anderson, she looked me up and down with the practiced eye of someone appraising a questionable purchase. I was still in my nursing uniform, having come directly from my shift to meet Mike's parents for dinner. Her perfectly manicured hand extended toward mine, but her smile never quite reached her eyes. "So, you're the nurse," she said, emphasizing the word in a way that made my profession sound like a curious hobby, rather than a calling that had required years of education and training. "Trauma nurse," I corrected gently, trying to ignore the way Mike tensed beside me. "I work in the emergency department at Boston General." "How exciting," she replied, in a tone that suggested she found it anything but. Her husband, James, a tall man with Mike's eyes and a permanent expression of distracted importance, merely nodded in my direction before returning to his phone call. That was 3 years ago, and despite my best efforts, my relationship with the Andersons had barely progressed beyond that initial cool assessment. Every family gathering was an exercise in subtle exclusion. Conversations that revolved around people I didn't know, references to private clubs I'd never enter, and the occasional pointed question about my humble beginnings in the Seattle suburbs. I had tried everything to bridge that gap. I brought thoughtful gifts, asked interested questions about their charity work, even offered to help Patricia with her annual hospital benefit gala given my medical background. Each attempt was met with the same polite but unmistakable message. I might have married their son, but I would never truly be an Anderson. Mike, for his part, seemed perpetually caught in the middle, unwilling to challenge his family's treatment of me, but uncomfortable with it nonetheless. He had grown up in their world of summer homes and boarding schools, charity galas, and family connections. He understood the unwritten rules in a way I never could. "They just need time," he would say after particularly difficult family dinners, his hand resting reassuringly on mine. "They're set in their ways." I wanted to believe him. I tried to believe him. But after nearly 3 years of strained smiles and backhanded compliments, that text message about Thanksgiving felt like confirmation of what I had suspected all along. In their eyes, I would always be the outsider who had somehow managed to slip past their defenses and claim their son. The day after receiving the text, I decided to confront the situation directly. I called Patricia myself, something I rarely did, preferring to let Mike handle communication with his family. "Jessica?" she answered, her surprise evident in the slight pause before my name. "Is everything all right?" "I wanted to talk about Thanksgiving," I said, keeping my voice level despite the nervous flutter in my chest. "Mike mentioned it would be family only this year." "Yes, that's right." Patricia's voice took on the brisk efficiency she used when discussing arrangements with service staff. "We're having a more intimate gathering at the lake house this year. Just Andersons. I'm sure you understand." Actually, I don't understand, I replied, surprising myself with my directness. I'm Mike's wife. That makes me family too. The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably before Patricia cleared her throat. Jessica, dear, I think we both know what I mean. This particular Thanksgiving has certain expectations. The governor may attend, and several of James's business associates. It's a specific type of gathering. My grip tightened on the phone, and I'm not the specific type of person you want there. Now, don't be dramatic, Patricia said with a sigh. It's simply that these events have a certain flow, a shared understanding among people of similar backgrounds. You'd probably find it terribly boring. The condescension in her voice made something twist inside me. Not just hurt, but indignation. I had spent years tiptoeing around the Andersons' thinly veiled elitism, making excuses for their behavior, telling myself that if I just tried harder, they would eventually accept me. I see, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. And does Mike know you've decided to exclude his wife from your family Thanksgiving? Patricia's laugh was light, dismissive. Of course he knows, dear. He understands how these things work. He was raised with these traditions. The implication hung in the air between us, unlike you. After ending the call, I sat on our apartment balcony overlooking the city, trying to process the conversation. Our home was modest by Anderson standards, a 2-bedroom apartment in a converted factory building in Riverside. Mike's trust fund could have afforded us something more luxurious, but I had insisted on living within our combined incomes. I wanted us to build something together, not just slide into the privileged existence his family expected. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent my career helping people in crisis, making split-second decisions that often meant the difference between life and death. Just last week, I had performed emergency procedures during a multiple casualty incident, working for 16 hours straight without breaking down. Yet somehow, Patricia Anderson's dismissal made me feel small, inadequate. That evening, when Mike returned from his architectural firm, I was waiting with dinner on the table. A simple pasta dish that was nothing like the elaborate meals his mother's personal chef prepared, but it was made with care. We need to talk about Thanksgiving, I said as he hung up his coat. Mike's expression immediately turned guarded. Mom explained the situation to you? She explained that I'm not welcome at your family Thanksgiving, yes. I tried to keep the hurt from my voice, focusing instead on the facts. What I don't understand is why you agreed to this without even discussing it with me. He sat down, heavily at our small dining table, running a hand through his dark hair, the same gesture he made when faced with a challenging design problem at work. Jess, you know how my family is about traditions. Thanksgiving at the lake house has always been a certain way. A certain way that doesn't include your wife? I pushed our plates aside, needing nothing between us for this conversation. It's not personal, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. It's just how they do things. There are expectations, appearances to maintain. The governor might be there. And what would the governor think if he knew Mike Anderson's wife was just a nurse from an ordinary family in Seattle? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice now. Mike looked pained. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Mike? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're okay with your family treating me like I'm not good enough to sit at their precious Thanksgiving table. You're overreacting, he said, his tone taking on the placating quality that always made me feel like a hysterical child. It's just one dinner. You could visit your parents instead. My parents live across the country, I reminded him. We agreed we couldn't afford 2 cross-country trips this holiday season, remember? We were going to see them at Christmas. I'd pay for your ticket, he offered, as if that solved everything. I stood up, needing to put physical distance between us before I said something I couldn't take back. That's not the point, Mike. The point is that your family is deliberately excluding me, and instead of standing up for me, for us, you're going along with it. He reached for my hand, but I stepped back. It's complicated, Jess. My family, they're set in their ways. Fighting them on this won't change anything. And neither will accepting it, I countered. If we don't draw a line somewhere, they'll keep pushing. Keep treating me like an outsider. Is that what you want for our marriage? For our future? The question hung between us, urgent and unanswered, as Mike's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it automatically. "It's my mother," he said, his expression conflicted. "She wants to know if we've decided about Thanksgiving yet." In that moment, watching my husband hesitate between his wife and his mother, I realized what I was up against. This wasn't just about a holiday dinner. It was about where Mike's loyalties truly lay, about whether our marriage could survive being constantly undermined by the family that had shaped him. "Tell her whatever you want," I said quietly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Turning away to hide the tears threatening to spill. "You clearly already know what you're going to do." I retreated to our bedroom, closing the door softly behind me. Through the thin wall, I could hear Mike on the phone with his mother, his voice low and placating. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. The pattern was all too familiar. Later that night, as we lay in bed with the weight of unresolved tension between us, my own phone lit up with a notification. It was an email from my mother, her weekly check-in that always made me feel connected to home despite the distance. "Dad's being honored at the New England Medical Conference next month," she wrote. "Last-minute invitation to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award. We'll be in Boston for 3 days. Any chance we could see you two? The dates are November 23rd to 25. I stared at the screen, the dates suddenly registering with clarity. November 23 was Thanksgiving. My parents would be in Boston, just an hour from the Andersons' lake house, for the very holiday that had become such a point of contention. An idea began to form, audacious and potentially disastrous, but somehow perfect, in its symmetry. Patricia Anderson had deemed me not their kind, based on assumptions about my background, my family, my worth in their rarefied world. What if those assumptions were challenged? What if the Andersons finally met my parents, not as I had described? Them, simply as, "Dad works in medicine, Mom's a professor," but as they truly were? In that moment, lying next to my sleeping husband in our modest apartment, I made a decision. The Andersons wanted a Thanksgiving with a certain type of people. I would give them exactly that, just not in the way they expected. I typed back, a quick response to my mother. "Perfect timing. How would you feel about Thanksgiving with Mike's family? I think it's time they met the Millers." The next morning, I called the lake house directly, knowing Patricia would be in her sunroom having her morning tea as she reviewed correspondence, a ritual Mike had once described with the reverence of someone discussing religious observance. "Anderson residence," answered the housekeeper, her voice professional but warm. Maria had always been kind to me, perhaps recognizing a fellow outsider in the Anderson orbit. "Good morning, Maria. It's Jessica Miller, Mike's wife. Is Mrs. Anderson available?" "One moment, Mrs. Miller." The brief wait felt interminable as I rehearsed what I would say, how I would present this new development without revealing my hand too early. "Jessica." Patricia's voice was cool, controlled. "I trust you and Mike have sorted out your Thanksgiving arrangements?" "Actually, that's why I'm calling," I said, infusing my voice with an enthusiasm I didn't entirely feel. "The most wonderful coincidence has occurred. My parents will be in Boston for Thanksgiving." "Oh?" The single syllable carried a wealth of skepticism. "Yes, my father has been invited to the New England Medical Conference. He's receiving an award." I let this detail hang for a moment, a small breadcrumb. They'll be here for 3 days, and they're so eager to finally meet Mike's family. I thought perhaps we could all have Thanksgiving together. They've heard so much about you. The silence that followed told me Patricia was recalculating, trying to fit this new information into her understanding of who I was, who my family was. "Your father is attending the medical conference?" she finally asked, her tone shifting subtly. "Yes, he's one of the keynote speakers. It was a last-minute invitation, but for this particular honor, he couldn't refuse." Another pause. "What exactly does your father do in medicine, Jessica? I don't believe you've ever specified." I smiled to myself, recognizing the gentle probe for information. "He's in neurosurgery at Seattle Presbyterian." "I see." The two words carried a weight of reassessment. "And your mother will be accompanying him?" "Yes, she's arranged time away from her department at the university." Again, I left the details deliberately vague, letting Patricia draw her own conclusions. "Well," she said after a moment, her voice warming by several degrees, "perhaps we should reconsider our Thanksgiving arrangements. It would be lovely to finally meet your parents after all this time." "Are you sure?" I pressed, unable to resist. "I wouldn't want to intrude on your family traditions. As you said, it's a certain type of gathering." "Nonsense," Patricia replied smoothly. "Any parents who raised you must be exceptional people. We would be honored to have them join us." The abrupt reversal would have been comical if it weren't so revealing. One hint that my parents might be people of status, and suddenly the doors to the Anderson Thanksgiving were flung wide open. "How kind of you," I said, keeping my tone neutral despite the mixture of vindication and disappointment swirling within me. "I'll let them know right away." As I hung up, I wondered what Patricia might be imagining now. Perhaps my father as chief of surgery, my mother as a department head, both of them fitting seamlessly into the Anderson world of accomplishment and status. She wasn't entirely wrong, but she had missed something fundamental about Thomas and Catherine Miller, something I was counting on to make this Thanksgiving truly memorable. That evening, when I told Mike about my parents' visit and Patricia's sudden change of heart, he looked both relieved and suspicious. "Mom invited your parents just like that, without meeting them first?" I shrugged, busying myself with folding laundry to avoid meeting his eyes directly. "I mentioned Dad's medical conference. She seemed interested." Mike's brow furrowed. "You never talk about your dad's work with my family. It never seemed relevant before." "Jess," he said slowly, "what exactly does your dad do? You always just say he works in medicine." I looked at my husband then, really looked at him, wondering how much he truly knew about my background. We had met during my night shift at the ER when he came in with a sprained wrist after a charity baseball game. Our courtship had been a whirlwind, focused on our connection in the moment rather than our histories. "My father is Dr. Thomas Miller," I said quietly. "He's the chief of neurosurgery at Seattle Presbyterian and a leading researcher in trauma-induced brain injuries. The conference is giving him a Lifetime Achievement Award for his work." Mike's eyes widened. "Your dad is Dr. Thomas Miller? The Thomas Miller? I had a professor in college who cited his research." I nodded, continuing to fold the clean scrubs I would wear to tomorrow's shift. "And my mother is Dr. Catherine Miller, who chairs the economics department at Washington State and has advised 2 governors on healthcare policy." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Mike asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "Because it shouldn't matter," I replied simply. "I wanted your family to accept me for who I am, not for who my parents are. I wanted you to love me for myself, not for my connections." Mike sat heavily on the edge of our bed. "All this time, my mother has been treating you like you come from nothing, and your parents are actually... they're exactly the kind of people she desperately tries to impress." "Yes," I acknowledged. "But here's the thing about my parents, Mike. They never cared about impressing people like your mother. They care about substance, not status. They taught me that what you do matters far less than how you treat people." "And now they're coming to Thanksgiving at the lake house," Mike said, a hint of worry creeping into his voice. My mother has no idea what she's in for, does she? I smiled then, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. No, she really doesn't. But I think it's exactly what this family needs. As I continued preparing for my night shift, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This Thanksgiving wouldn't just be about proving my worth to the Andersons. It would be about showing them a different way to measure value altogether. And maybe, just maybe, it would finally help Mike see the choice he needed to make. Not just about a holiday dinner, but about the kind of life we would build together. The week before Thanksgiving unfolded with a strange new dynamic between me and the Andersons. Patricia called daily with updates on the dinner preparations, each conversation laced with subtle questions about my parents. "Will your father be coming directly from the conference?" she asked on Tuesday. "I've arranged for the guest room with the view of the lake. It has a small study where he could review papers if needed." "That's thoughtful," I replied, stirring the pot of soup I was making for dinner. "They're staying at the conference hotel on Wednesday night, but they'll come to the lake house Thursday morning." "Excellent. And should we arrange transportation? James would be happy to send the car." I smiled to myself, imagining my father's reaction to being picked up in a chauffeured town car. "No need. Dad prefers to drive himself. He finds it relaxing." After presenting, there was a brief pause. "Of course. Very self-sufficient. Admirable trait." Each conversation followed the same pattern. Patricia fishing for information, me providing just enough to maintain her interest without revealing the full picture of who my parents truly were. By Thursday evening, Patricia had upgraded the Thanksgiving dinner from intimate family gathering to what Mike described as a full Anderson production. The best china, fresh floral arrangements being shipped in from New York, and the menu expanded to include dishes that she thought might impress visitors from the medical academic community. "Mom's going all out," Mike observed as we drove home from his parents' house after a tense pre-Thanksgiving planning dinner. "I haven't seen her this worked up since the governor's wife came for the garden party." "She's making assumptions," I said, watching the city lights blur past our car window. "About who my parents are, what they value." Mike glanced at me, his expression troubled. "You're setting her up for a fall, aren't you?" I turned to face him directly. "I'm not setting anyone up, Mike. I'm simply allowing your mother to meet my parents as they are. If her expectations don't match reality, that's not my doing." "But you knew how she'd react when you mentioned your dad's conference. You deliberately let her think—" "I let her think nothing," I interrupted, a spark of anger flaring. "I stated facts. Your mother drew her own conclusions based on her own values. That's not manipulation. That's her worldview at work." He fell silent, hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as he navigated through traffic. After several minutes, he spoke again, his voice softer. "I just don't want Thanksgiving to become a battleground." "Neither do I assured him, reaching over to touch his arm. "But something has to change, Mike. We can't keep living like this, me constantly being judged and found wanting, you caught in the middle. Maybe meeting my parents will help your family see me differently. Or maybe it will make everything worse," he muttered. I didn't have an answer for that possibility. The truth was, I didn't know how Thanksgiving would unfold. I only knew that continuing as we had been wasn't an option, not if we wanted our marriage to survive. The next day, I called my parents to prepare them for what they might encounter at the Anderson Lake House. "So these are the infamous in-laws we've heard so little about," my mother said, her voice warm with amusement rather than judgment. "The ones who think our Jesse isn't good enough for their precious son." "Mom," I sighed, "it's more complicated than that. The Andersons have a certain way of looking at the world. Everything is about connections and appearances and maintaining their position." "Sounds exhausting," Dad commented in the background. "Do they ever just watch a ball game and eat chips?" Despite my anxiety, I laughed. Not that I've seen. Everything is an occasion. Even casual family dinners involve 3 courses and conversation about people who summer on the right islands. Well, Mom said decisively, they're in for a treat with the Millers. We're bringing our famous cranberry relish and your father's wearing his favorite sweater, the one with the coffee stain he refuses to acknowledge. Catherine, I heard Dad protest, that's my lucky presenting sweater. Their easy banter soothed something in me, a reminder of the home I'd grown up in, accomplished but unpretentious, where achievements were celebrated but never used as currency in social transactions. There's something else you should know, I said, hesitating slightly. Patricia, Mike's mother, she's under the impression that that you fit a certain profile. What kind of profile? Mom asked, curiosity evident in her tone. The kind that would impress people, like the Andersons. I mentioned Dad's award and the conference, and she immediately changed her tune about Thanksgiving. Suddenly I was welcome, and she was falling over herself to accommodate you both. My father's chuckle rumbled through the speakerphone. Ah, so she thinks we're important people who might elevate her standing if she can claim connection to, something like that, I admitted. I didn't lie to her. I just didn't correct her assumptions. And what would you like us to do with this information, sweetheart? Mom asked, cutting to the heart of the matter as she always did. I paused, considering. Just be yourselves. That's all I want. Not to embarrass her or make a point, but just be the people who raised me, who taught me what really matters. That we can do, Dad assured me. Though I should warn you, I packed my joke book for the trip. The neurosurgery humor section is particularly groan-worthy. Thomas, you are not subjecting our daughter's in-laws to your medical puns, Mom admonished, though I could hear the smile in her voice. We'll see, he replied with mock seriousness. If the situation calls for humor intervention, I must be prepared to administer it. It's the Hippocratic Oath. After ending the call, I felt a curious mix of anticipation and trepidation. My parents would arrive in Boston tomorrow evening, and Thanksgiving was just 2 days away. Whatever happened at the Anderson Lake House, it would undoubtedly change the dynamic of my relationship with Mike's family, for better or worse. The following evening, Mike and I drove to the conference hotel to meet my parents for dinner. As we pulled into the hotel driveway, I spotted them immediately. Mom in her practical travel clothes rather than designer wear. Dad with his slightly rumpled appearance that belied his status in the medical community. They looked exactly as they always had, comfortable in their own skin, unbothered by the trappings of prestige that surrounded them at events like this. There they are, I said, pointing them out to Mike. He studied them for a moment, his expression thoughtful. They look so normal. I raised an eyebrow. What were you expecting? He shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. I don't know. Given their credentials, maybe something more. More like your parents? I suggested gently. He nodded, having the grace to look slightly chagrined. I guess I've been conditioned to expect a certain appearance to match certain achievements. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Mike. That's the mindset I've been pushing against since we got married. Worth isn't about appearance or connections. It's about who you are as a person. Before he could respond, my parents spotted us and waved enthusiastically. Dad wrapped me in, a bear hug that smelled of his familiar aftershave, while Mom embraced Mike with genuine warmth. So this is the architect who stole our daughter's heart, she said, holding him at arm's length to look him over. You passed the first test. That smile when you saw her just now. That's what a mother looks for. Mike blushed slightly, unused, to such direct and personal assessment. It's wonderful to finally meet you both. Jess speaks of you often. All terrible things, I hope, Dad joked, clapping Mike on the shoulder. A healthy fear of the in-laws is a solid foundation for any marriage. Over dinner at a casual bistro near the hotel, Mike's suggestion, surprisingly, I watched my husband interact with my parents. Initially stiff and formal, he gradually relaxed as the conversation flowed easily from topic to topic, without the rigid structure of Anderson family dinners. My father shared stories from the ER that had Mike laughing until tears came to his eyes, while my mother engaged him in a thoughtful discussion about urban development that touched on his architectural passions. "Your designs balance function and beauty," she observed after he showed her photos of his latest project on his phone. "That's rare, finding that equilibrium between practicality and aesthetics." "Thank you," Mike said, clearly pleased by her genuine interest. Most clients just want something that looks impressive. They don't always appreciate the thought that goes into making a space actually work for the people who use it. "That sounds like a metaphor for something larger," Dad commented, raising his eyebrows meaningfully at me. I kicked him gently, under the table, but the comment hit its mark. Mike glanced between my father and me, a new understanding dawning in his expression. As we walked my parents back to their hotel after dinner, Mike grew quiet, thoughtful. When we said our goodbyes, with plans to see them at the lake house on Thanksgiving morning, he hugged them both with an ease that hadn't been present at the beginning of the evening. In the car on the way home, he finally broke his silence. "Your parents aren't what I expected." "In what way?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "They're so accessible. Your dad's one of the top neurosurgeons in the country. Your mom's this respected academic, but they're just people. Real people. There's no performance, no positioning." "That's how I was raised," I said simply. Achievement was valued, but never used as a way to elevate ourselves above others. Success was measured by impact, not status. Mike was quiet for another long moment before saying softly, "I think I understand you better now." The words hung between us, filled with meaning beyond their simplicity. For perhaps the first time, Mike was seeing clearly the values that had shaped me, and by extension, the conflict that had been brewing since I entered his family's orbit. "What do you think will happen tomorrow?" he asked as we pulled into our apartment building's parking garage. I considered the question carefully. "I think your mother will be surprised. Whether that's a good surprise or a disappointment depends on what she's really looking for." "And what do you think that is?" "I think she wants validation," I replied. "Honestly? Confirmation that the metrics she's used to measure worth her entire life are the correct ones. That status and connection and appearance really do matter most." "And your parents won't give her that," Mike concluded. "No," I agreed. "They won't. But maybe they'll offer her something more valuable instead." The morning of Thanksgiving dawned clear and cold, the kind of crisp late November day that spoke of winter's approach. As Mike and I drove to the lake house, the landscape gradually transformed from urban density to the affluent suburbs, and finally to the exclusive lakeside community where the Anderson family compound stood, a sprawling colonial revival with white columns and perfect symmetry. "Home sweet home," Mike murmured as we pulled into the circular driveway already lined with luxury vehicles. His tone held a complexity I hadn't heard before, not quite. Sarcastic, but not entirely sincere either. It made me wonder if our conversations over the past week had shifted something in his perception of his family's world. Patricia met us at the door, immaculately dressed in a cashmere sweater and pearls despite it being barely 9 in the morning. Her hair was freshly styled, her makeup flawless. "There you are," she greeted us, kissing Mike's cheek and giving me a brief embrace that smelled of expensive perfume. "Everything's on schedule. The florist just finished and the caterers are setting up in the kitchen." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "I've seated your father next to Senator Mitchell. I thought they might have interesting things to discuss." I exchanged a glance with Mike, who looked caught between amusement and alarm. "Mom, maybe don't orchestrate Dad's conversations too much. Dr. Miller might have his own ideas about who he wants to talk to." Patricia waved away the concern. "Networking is the whole point of gatherings like this, Michael. I'm sure Dr. Miller understands that." She turned to me with an eager expression I'd never seen directed my way before. "What time did you say your parents would arrive?" "Around 11, I replied. "They wanted to stop by the conference first, to check in with some colleagues." "Perfect. That gives us time for a mimosa before they get here." She ushered us into the formal living room where James Anderson stood by the fireplace, drink already in hand despite the early hour. "The prodigal son returns," he said by way of greeting, raising his glass toward Mike. "And Jessica, looking lovely as always." The compliment was new, as was the warmth in his voice when he said my name. "Thank you, James." I accepted the mimosa Patricia pressed into my hand, watching as she fussed with the already perfect flower arrangements. "I hear we're meeting." "Your parents today," James continued, studying me with new interest. "Your father's receiving quite an honor at the medical conference, I understand." "Yes, the Lifetime Achievement in Neurosurgical Innovation," I confirmed, deliberately using the formal title to observe their reactions. James nodded appreciatively. "Impressive. Mitchell will be pleased. His foundation funds medical research. They'll have plenty to discuss." As James and Patricia continued to speculate about the connections and conversations that might emerge from this newly elevated Thanksgiving gathering, I sipped my mimosa and tried to center myself. The performance unfolding around me, the Andersons' sudden interest in my background, their transparent excitement at the prospect of adding prestigious new connections to their social network, was exactly what I had anticipated. Yet witnessing it firsthand still left me with a hollow feeling. Mike moved to stand beside me, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "They're excited about the wrong things, aren't they?" The observation, so aligned with my own thoughts, caught me by surprise. I looked up at him, searching his face. "Yes, they are." "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I never realized how it felt to be valued only for what others think you represent. Not until I saw it happening with your parents. People I already know are extraordinary regardless of their titles." Before I could respond, Patricia called us to help with final arrangements, sending Mike to check on the wine selection while pulling me aside to review the place cards. "I've seated your mother next to Elizabeth Wilson. She's on the board of the Symphony and married to Richard Wilson of Wilson Financial. Very cultured woman. I'm sure they'll get along splendidly." I bit back a smile, imagining my mother's reaction to being managed so deliberately. Mom usually just likes to talk to whoever she finds interesting, regardless of their position. Patricia looked momentarily confused by this concept before patting my arm indulgently. "Well, I'm sure she'll find Elizabeth fascinating. Now, about your father's dietary preferences, the chef can accommodate any restrictions." "Dad eats everything," I assured her. "He grew up on a farm in Nebraska. Simple tastes." This information didn't quite compute for Patricia, who blinked rapidly before recovering. "Well, nevertheless, we have options. Everything is organic, of course, and locally sourced where possible." The next hour passed in a flurry of last-minute preparations, with Patricia growing increasingly tense as 11 o'clock approached. She checked her reflection multiple times, adjusted flower arrangements that needed no adjustment, and twice sent the housekeeping staff to re-inspect the guest bathroom. At precisely 11:15, the doorbell rang. Patricia smoothed her cashmere sweater, touched her pearls in a gesture I recognized as her centering ritual before important social events, and moved to answer the door herself, an honor usually reserved for visiting dignitaries or the governor. I hung back slightly, suddenly nervous about the collision of worlds that was about to occur. Mike reached for my hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "It's going to be fine," he whispered. "Your parents are great." even if my family doesn't see that. Immediately I do. The simple statement fortified me. Whatever happened next, something had already shifted between Mike and me. A new understanding, a realignment of priorities. Patricia opened the door with her practiced social smile, the one I'd seen deployed at charity galas and country club events. Dr. and Dr. Miller, welcome to our home. We're so delighted you could join us. My parents stood on the doorstep, looking exactly as they always did. Dad in his comfortable slacks and the infamous lucky sweater with the barely perceptible coffee stain. Mom in a practical pantsuit that prioritized comfort over designer labels. They carried a ceramic dish that I recognized as containing Mom's homemade cranberry relish, and Dad clutched a small gift bag that likely contained the bottle of local Washington wine they brought to every dinner party. Please call us Tom. And Kate, my father said warmly, extending his hand to Patricia. And you must be Patricia. Jesse's told us so much about you. I bit my lip to suppress a smile at the slight widening of Patricia's eyes, both at the informal address and the nickname no one in Boston ever used for me. Tom and Kate, she repeated, recovering quickly though her smile had stiffened slightly. How refreshing. Please come in. James, darling, the Millers have arrived. My father handed Patricia the gift bag. A little something from our home state. Not the fanciest vintage, but it's from a small family winery we've visited for years. Has character. Patricia accepted it with a murmur of thanks, though I noted she didn't examine the bottle, a telling departure from her usual practice of evaluating wine gifts and mentally cataloging their value. And this is my famous cranberry relish, Mom added, passing the ceramic dish to James, who had appeared at Patricia's side. Old family recipe. The secret is adding a touch of habanero. Gives it a little kick that cuts through the richness of the turkey. James looked momentarily nonplussed, clearly not accustomed to guests bringing homemade food to an Anderson gathering where everything was professionally catered. How thoughtful, he managed, holding the dish somewhat awkwardly. I'll just take this to the kitchen. I hope that's okay, Mom said, not missing the hesitation. I never like to show up empty-handed, and Thanksgiving isn't Thanksgiving without my grandmother's cranberry recipe. Of course it's okay, I interjected, moving forward to hug my parents. Maria will find a place for it on the table, won't you, Maria? I directed this to the housekeeper who had appeared in the foyer, curiosity evident in her expression. Certainly, Mrs. Miller, Maria agreed with a warm smile. She took the dish from James with far more enthusiasm than he had shown. Homemade is always best. My own mother used chili in her cranberry sauce too. Mom immediately engaged with Maria, asking about her mother's recipe and where her family was from, showing genuine interest that made the housekeeper light up in a way I rarely saw in the Anderson household. Patricia watched this exchange with a mixture of confusion and mild alarm, unused to seeing staff treated as equals in social conversation. Dad, meanwhile, was admiring the architecture of the foyer. Beautiful moldings, he commented to no one in particular. Reminds me of that hospital in Boston where I did my residency, the old wing that used to be a private home. Same era, I'd guess. 1890s, Mike supplied, stepping forward to shake my father's hand. The house has been in the Anderson family for 4 generations. They've maintained most of the original features. Smart, Dad nodded. They don't make craftsmanship like this anymore. Too expensive now, even for hospitals with donors' names on the buildings. I watched as Patricia's expression shifted, trying to reconcile the accomplished neurosurgeon she had anticipated with the plain-spoken, slightly rumpled man standing in her foyer discussing architectural details with her son. Mike, for his part, seemed completely at ease, guiding my father into the living room with a hand on his shoulder, asking about his presentation at the conference with genuine interest. Boring technical stuff, Dad replied with a self-deprecating wave. Most of the audience was just there for the continuing education credits. but it's always nice when your peers think your work is worth recognizing, even if you're just the guy who figured out a slightly better way to stop brains from swelling after trauma. Just the guy who revolutionized emergency neurosurgical procedures and saved thousands of lives, I corrected with affectionate exasperation. Dad winked at me. Details. Now, is that a real fire in that fireplace? Nothing better than a wood fire on Thanksgiving. As my parents made their way into the living room, greeting the other guests who had begun to arrive with the same unaffected warmth they showed everyone, I hung back to observe Patricia's reaction. She stood very still in the foyer, her social smile fixed in place but strain evident around her eyes. "They're not what you expected," I said quietly, moving to stand beside her. She glanced at me sharply. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do," I replied, keeping my tone gentle rather than accusatory. "You expected power dressing and name-dropping and the kind of performance the Andersons have perfected? But my parents don't operate that way. Never have." Patricia's lips thinned slightly. "They're certainly casual for people of their standing." "Their standing doesn't matter to them," I explained. "What they do matters. Who they help matters. But titles and appearances? Those have never been priorities." Before Patricia could respond, Elizabeth Wilson approached, curiosity evident in her expression. "Patricia, darling, are these Jessica's parents who just arrived? The neurosurgeon? And the economist?" Patricia straightened, social armor locking back into place. "Yes, Dr. and Dr. Miller. They're here for the medical conference. Tom is receiving an award." She emphasized my father's first name with just enough inflection to signal to Elizabeth that the informality had been the Miller's choice, not hers. "How wonderful," Elizabeth enthused. "Richard will want to meet them. His foundation is funding several medical research initiatives." As Elizabeth moved toward the living room, Patricia turned back to me, her expression unreadable. "We should join the others. The senator has just arrived, and he specifically asked to meet your father." I nodded, following her into the room where social currents were already swirling and reconfiguring around my parents' unexpected presence. Dad stood by the fireplace, gesturing animatedly as he told a story to Mike and James, while Mom chatted with Maria and another staff member who had paused in their duties, drawn in by her genuine questions about their families and holiday traditions. The senator, a dignified man in his 60s, hovered nearby, clearly waiting for an appropriate moment to introduce himself to the guest of honor. Patricia moved swiftly to facilitate this, her social orchestration instincts kicking in despite her evident discomfort with the situation. "Senator Mitchell," she said smoothly, touching my father's arm to gain his attention. "Allow me to introduce Dr. Thomas Miller, Chief of Neurosurgery at Seattle Presbyterian, and tonight's honoree at the medical conference." Dad turned, wiping his hand on his pants before extending it to the senator. "Just Tom, please. And that handshake's better now that I've de-pretzeled myself. Your wife makes a mean spicy mustard dip, Patricia." The senator chuckled, seemingly charmed by my father's lack of pretension. "Pleasure to meet you, Tom. I understand you've done groundbreaking work in traumatic brain injury treatment. Been lucky enough to work with some brilliant people," Dad acknowledged modestly. "And even luckier to have the resources to implement what we've learned. Not every hospital has that luxury." The conversation quickly shifted to healthcare policy and funding inequities, with Dad bypassing the expected social niceties to speak directly about issues he cared deeply about. To my surprise, Senator Mitchell appeared genuinely engaged, taking out a small notebook at one point to jot down information about a pilot program my father had mentioned. Meanwhile, across the room, I could see my mother had drawn a small crowd of her own. Not the society women Patricia had strategically seated her near, but a mixture of staff members and younger guests, including Mike's sister Amanda, who was listening intently as Mom discussed the economics of healthcare from a patient perspective. "The numbers mean nothing if people can't access care," she was saying, her passion for the subject evident in her animated gestures. My research team is studying the correlation between proximity to emergency services and survival rates across different economic demographics. The disparities are shocking. Amanda, who I knew was considering medical school despite her parents' preference for law, looked captivated. "Do you think telehealth could help bridge some of those gaps?" she asked. "Absolutely," Mom agreed, "but only with significant infrastructure investment in underserved communities. Technology is only as accessible as the systems that support it." The conversations flowed organically, reshaping the carefully orchestrated seating arrangements and social groupings Patricia had planned. As the guests moved toward the dining room for dinner, they naturally clustered around topics of interest rather than social status. With my parents at the center of earnest discussions that had nothing to do with networking or impression management, Patricia watched it all unfold with an increasingly bewildered expression, her controlled thanksgiving slipping through her fingers as authentic engagement replaced social performance. Mike appeared at my side, a look of wonder on his face. "Your parents are kind of amazing," he observed. "They've completely transformed the energy of this gathering." "They're just being themselves," I said, though pride warmed my voice. "They've never known any other way to be. That's what makes it amazing," he replied softly. "Do you realize? The governor just spent 15 minutes discussing rural healthcare access with your mother instead of talking property tax with my father? I've never seen that happen at an Anderson event." As we took our seats at the dining table, now thoroughly rearranged from Patricia's careful plan as guests had shifted to continue their conversations, I caught sight of my mother helping Maria bring out the cranberry relish, insisting it be placed alongside the caterer's more elaborate version. "Options are the spice of life," she declared cheerfully, winking at me across the table. Patricia, seated at the head of the table beside a thoroughly engaged Senator Mitchell who was still deep in conversation with my father, looked like a woman, watching a carefully constructed sandcastle being reshaped by an unexpected tide. Not destroyed exactly, but transformed into something unrecognizable from her original vision. As James stood to carve the turkey and make the traditional Anderson Thanksgiving toast, I wondered what would happen next. Something had shifted in the carefully maintained social hierarchy of the Anderson world. I just wasn't sure yet what that would mean for my place within it, or for my marriage to the man who had been raised to inherit that world. James Anderson stood at the head of the table, carving knife poised over the heritage turkey that had been sourced from an organic farm and prepared according to a recipe featured in last month's Gourmet Living magazine. The tableau was picture perfect. Crystal glasses catching the light from the antique chandelier, fine china gleaming against the embroidered tablecloth, floral arrangements creating a tasteful autumn palette down the center of the table. And yet something was different. The atmosphere had shifted from the usual carefully orchestrated Anderson gathering to something more spontaneous and alive. Conversations flowed freely across the table, rather than in the careful dyads Patricia typically arranged. The governor's wife was deep in discussion with Maria about traditional holiday recipes. Senator Mitchell had moved his chair closer to my father to continue their healthcare discussion. Even the typically reserved Crawford sisters were animated, drawn into my mother's warm inquiries about their charitable foundation. James cleared his throat, reclaiming attention in the way of a man accustomed to commanding rooms. As is tradition, in the Anderson family, before we carve the turkey, we take a moment to express gratitude for our blessings and for the company we keep. The room quieted, though not with the immediate deference I had observed at previous Anderson gatherings. Several conversations tapered off naturally rather than being abruptly silenced. "This year," James continued, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a man who gave speeches at board meetings and charity galas, "we are particularly honored to welcome distinguished guests to our table. Dr. Thomas Miller, whose groundbreaking work in neurosurgery has saved countless lives, and Dr. Catherine Miller, whose economic research continues to influence policy at the highest levels." My parents exchanged a quick glance, the kind of wordless communication that comes from decades of partnership. Dad looked faintly amused. Mom slightly uncomfortable with the formal recognition. "We are also grateful," James added, his gaze sweeping the table. "For family bonds that bring us together, for traditions that sustain us, and for new perspectives that enrich our understanding." This last part was delivered with a glance toward my parents that seemed almost appreciative. It was a departure from James's usual toasts, which typically emphasized legacy and achievement rather than connection and growth. As James began to carve the turkey, the conversations resumed. I found myself seated between Elizabeth Wilson and the governor's chief of staff, both of whom suddenly seemed very interested in my work at the hospital. "Trauma nursing must be incredibly demanding," Elizabeth commented, her tone respectful in a way it had never been before. "Do you work primarily with your father's cases?" "Dad practices in Seattle," I reminded her. "I've built my career independently. And yes, it can be demanding, but that's what makes it meaningful. We see people on the worst days of their lives and have the privilege of helping them through it." "My niece is considering nursing," the chief of staff added. "She's torn between that and medical school. Any advice I could pass along?" As I shared my thoughts on the different paths in healthcare, I noticed Patricia watching me from her end of the table. Her expression was difficult to read. Not the disapproval I was accustomed to, but something more complex. Confusion, perhaps. Or reevaluation. Across the table, Mike was engaged in conversation with my mother and his sister Amanda. Their heads bent together as Mom explained something that had Amanda nodding enthusiastically. The sight warmed me. These separate parts of my life finally intersecting, creating new connections I hadn't imagined possible at the Anderson table. The dinner progressed through multiple courses, each one executed with the precision I had come to expect from Patricia's entertainments. Yet the food seemed almost secondary to the conversations flowing around the table. Substantial discussions about healthcare policy, economic inequality, medical innovations, and even personal stories that rarely emerged in the status-conscious environment of Anderson gatherings. My father, never one to stand on ceremony, had rolled up his sleeves by the time dessert was served, using a dinner roll to illustrate some point about cranial pressure to an enthralled Senator Mitchell. My mother had kicked off her shoes under the table, something I noticed when she crossed her ankles. A comfortable habit from decades of academic dinners where ideas mattered more than formality. When Maria brought out the dessert options, the caterer's elegant pumpkin mousse alongside a more traditional pie, Dad raised his glass in an impromptu toast. "To Patricia and James," he said warmly, "for opening their home to us on this day of gratitude. In my family, we believe that breaking bread together is sacred, not because of the setting or the silverware, but because of the human connection it creates. Thank you for this connection today." The simplicity and sincerity of his words seemed to touch something in the room. Even Patricia, who had been increasingly quiet as the dinner progressed, offered a genuine smile in response. "And to Jessica," Dad continued, his eyes finding mine across the table, "who bridges worlds with grace and compassion, both in her work and in her life. We couldn't be prouder of the woman you've become." I felt tears prick unexpectedly at the corners of my eyes. Mike reached under the table to squeeze my hand, his touch communicating solidarity and perhaps something more, a new understanding. As dessert was served, I found myself momentarily alone with Patricia when she joined me at the coffee service set up in the adjoining room. "Your parents are not what I expected," she said quietly, echoing Mike's words from days earlier. I nodded, measuring coffee grounds into the expensive machine. "They're just themselves. They've never tried to be anything else." Patricia was silent for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of a porcelain cup. "They're very authentic." The word seemed to cost her something to say, as if acknowledging this quality required rearranging something fundamental in her understanding. "They've always taught me that pretense costs more than it's worth," I replied, keeping my tone conversational rather than challenging. That the energy spent maintaining appearances could be better used creating real connections. An unconventional philosophy in certain circles, Patricia observed, though without her usual dismissiveness. But an effective one, I pointed out gently. Look at what's happening in your dining room right now. People are engaged, connected, having meaningful conversations rather than just exchanging pleasant nothings. Patricia glanced back toward the table, where animated discussions continued over dessert. The usual careful departure times of Anderson gatherings had been forgotten as guests remained engaged with one another. Your father is brilliant, she conceded. The senator is completely captivated by him. Dad is brilliant, I agreed. But that's not why people respond to him. They respond to his humanity, his ability to see the person behind the title or position. He treats everyone with the same respect and interest, whether they're a hospital, janitor, or a senator. As if to illustrate my point, we could see my father now deep in conversation with one of the catering staff who had emerged from the kitchen. The young man was gesturing animatedly, clearly explaining something about the dessert preparation, while Dad listened with genuine interest, asking questions that made the caterer light up with professional pride. Patricia watched this interaction, her expression thoughtful. It's rather remarkable, she admitted. He has a way of making people comfortable. It's not a technique, I said. It's who he is, who they both are. They value substance over status, always have. Patricia turned back to me, studying my face with new awareness. And that's how they raised you. It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. Yes, to see people, not positions. To judge by character, not credentials. That explains a great deal about you, she said slowly. Your resistance to certain aspects of our family's way of life. It wasn't resistance, I clarified. It was just being true to my own values. The same values that make me a good nurse, a good wife to your son. I've never wanted to change your family, Patricia. I just wanted to be accepted for who I actually, not who you wanted me to be. A flash of something like recognition crossed her face, quickly followed by what might have been discomfort. She busied herself with selecting a coffee cup, avoiding my gaze. We should return to our guests, she said finally. The coffee can wait. As we rejoined the table, I noticed a subtle shift in Patricia's demeanor. She seemed less focused on managing impressions and more present in the actual conversations happening around her. When my mother asked about the history of the lake house, a genuine question born of interest rather than assessment of value, Patricia responded not with the rehearsed provenance I had heard at countless gatherings, but with personal anecdotes about summers spent there as a child. My father built that dock, she said, pointing through the dining room windows to the wooden structure extending into the lake. He wasn't particularly handy, banking was his forte, but he insisted on doing it himself. It's slightly crooked. If you look closely, my mother was mortified, but he was so proud of it. That's the best kind of family legacy, Mom replied warmly. The imperfect things made with love. Patricia paused, as if considering this perspective for the first time. Yes, I suppose it is. As the evening progressed, I observed small but significant changes in the usual Anderson Thanksgiving choreography. The rigid post-dinner separation, men to the study for brandy, women to the sitting room for coffee, dissolved as people followed conversations rather than gender conventions. My father and the caterer had moved to the kitchen, where they were now joined by James and the governor, all examining some culinary technique with unexpected camaraderie. Mike found me by the fireplace, where I had paused to warm my hands. This is not how Anderson Thanksgivings usually go, he murmured, a hint of wonder in his voice. Is that good or bad? I asked, studying his expression. Good, he said without hesitation. Definitely good. I've never seen my parents so, I don't know, real? Dad's actually laughing in there. Not his polite social laugh, but really laughing. I leaned into his side, gratitude washing over me. Your sister seems to be hitting it off with my mom. We both glanced toward Amanda and my mother, who had moved to the window seat and were deep in conversation. My mother's hands moving expressively as she explained something that had Amanda hanging on every word. Mom's been pushing her toward law school because that's the proper path for an Anderson, Mike explained. But Amanda's always been drawn to medicine. I think your mom is the first person who's actually listened to what she wants instead of telling her what she should want. A burst of laughter from the kitchen drew our attention. My father emerged, followed by James and the governor, all three carrying fresh drinks and sporting expressions of amused camaraderie. Your father just told us the most outrageous story about an emergency surgery during a power outage, James D. informed me, his usually perfect composure slightly loosened, using a camping headlamp of all things. The Bear Lake incident, I nodded, familiar with the story that had become legend in our family. Dad's favorite example of improvisation in medicine. Necessity is the mother of invention, Daddy agreed cheerfully. Though in this case, necessity was more like a demanding taskmaster with unreasonable deadlines. The governor chuckled. Thomas, you need to come speak at our healthcare summit next spring. We need more voices like yours. Practical, experienced, focused on real-world solutions. Only if you promise actual policy discussions, not just photo opportunities, Dad replied frankly. I don't do well with symbolic gestures that don't lead to action. Rather than being offended by this directness, the governor seemed to appreciate it. Fair enough. Real discussions. I promise. We could use some straight talk in those meetings. As the evening stretched well past the usual end time of Anderson gatherings, I found myself on the lakeside porch, seeking a moment of quiet to process the unexpected turns of the easy day. The night was cold but clear, stars reflected in the still water of the lake, the crooked dock a shadowy line extending from shore. The door opened behind me and I turned, expecting Mike. Instead, Patricia stood there, wrapped in a cashmere shawl, her expression unreadable in the dim light. May I join you? She asked, an unusual tentativeness in her voice. Of course, I replied, making room on the porch swing where I'd been sitting. She settled beside me, both of us looking out at the moonlit lake for several moments before she spoke again. I owe you an apology, Jessica. The words were so unexpected that for a moment I wondered if I had misheard her. Patricia Anderson did not apologize, at least not in my experience of her. For what specifically? I asked, not unkindly but wanting clarity. She sighed, the sound carrying in the quiet night. For misjudging you. For assuming I knew what quality looked like, what substance looked like. For trying to exclude you from our family traditions. I remained silent, giving her space to continue. I thought I knew what was best for Michael, she went on. What kind of partner would fit into our world, our way of life. I had a very specific image in mind, and when you didn't conform to it, you decided I didn't belong, I finished softly. She nodded, her profile silvered in the moonlight. I was wrong. Meeting your parents today. Seeing the people who shaped you. I understand better now. What do you understand? I asked. That there are different kinds of worth, she said slowly, as if working through the thought as she spoke it. Different ways of moving through the world. Your parents are extraordinary people, but not in the way I expected. They don't use their accomplishments as currency. They don't leverage their positions for social advantage. They're just authentic, as I said earlier. And that surprised you, I observed. Yes, she admitted. In my world, in our world, achievements are meant to be displayed, connections cultivated, status maintained. It's exhausting sometimes, but it's the water we swim in. I never questioned it until today. She turned to face me directly. Your mother asked me a question over dessert that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. She asked, when was the last time I did something purely because it brought me joy, not because it was expected or appropriate? A smile tugged at my lips. That sounds like Mom. What did you answer? I couldn't think of anything, Patricia confessed, genuine distress in her voice. Not one single thing. Isn't that terrible? I organize charity galas and serve on boards and maintain the perfect home, but joy? Pure, uncomplicated joy? I couldn't remember the last time. The vulnerability in her admission touched me. This was a side of Patricia Anderson I had never imagined existed. It's never too late to change that, I offered gently. She nodded, quiet for a moment before asking, What brings you joy, Jessica? Real joy? I considered the question, appreciating that she had asked it with genuine interest. Small things, mostly. Sunrise after a night shift when I've helped someone survive. Against the odds. Reading in bed with Mike on Sunday mornings. Swimming in the lake I grew up on when I visit my parents. Moments of connection with patients, even on their worst days. Patricia listened, really listened, perhaps for the first time since I'd known her. Your life seems rich, in ways I hadn't recognized. It is rich, I agreed. Just not in the ways your world typically measures. I think I've been measuring the wrong things, she said quietly. Inside the house, laughter erupted again, the sound carrying through the windows. Senator Mitchell's distinctive baritone rose above the others, followed by my mother's delighted response. Your mother just made the most incisive comment about economic policy, Patricia remarked, a hint of admiration in her voice. She completely changed the senator's perspective with one perfectly articulated argument. In all the years I've known him, I've never seen him reconsider a position so quickly. Mom has that effect on people, I said fondly. She helps them see things from angles they hadn't considered before. A valuable gift, Patricia acknowledged. One you seem to have inherited. I turned to her in surprise. What do you mean? You've been doing the same thing in our family, she explained. Challenging our perspectives, our assumptions. I've resisted it. Rather forcefully, I'm afraid. But perhaps that was a mistake. The admission hung between us, significant in its humility. I can't promise to change overnight, Patricia continued, her voice taking on a more practical tone. Old habits and all that. But I want you to know that I see you differently now, Jessica. And I'm glad, truly glad, that you're part of our family. The words I had longed to hear for 3 years of marriage washed over me, unexpectedly emotional in their impact. Thank you, I managed, my voice tight with feeling. Patricia reached over and briefly squeezed my hand, a physical gesture of affection I had never received from her before. We should go back inside before they send a search party, she said, rising from the swing. Michael was looking for you earlier. As we turned toward the house, Patricia paused, looking back at the crooked dock silvered by moonlight. You know, I've been meaning to have that old dock torn down and replaced with something more appropriate. But perhaps there's value in keeping it as it is, imperfect but made with love, as your mother said. Inside, the gathering had shifted to the main living room, where the fire had been built up against the evening chill. My father was at the center of a group that included James, the governor, and Senator Mitchell, while my mother had drawn in several of the women who had initially seemed most judgmental of my background. Mike appeared at my side as Patricia rejoined her husband. Everything okay? He asked, concern evident in his expression. Better than okay, I assured him, leaning into his warmth. Your mother and I just had the most honest conversation we've ever had. Mike's eyebrows rose, in surprise. Really? What prompted that? I think meeting my parents helped her see me differently, I explained. See us differently. He nodded thoughtfully, watching as his mother rejoined the group with a relaxed smile I rarely witnessed in social settings. They've changed something here today. I'm not sure exactly what, but I can feel it. They just showed up as themselves, I said. Sometimes that's all it takes to shift perspective, seeing another way of being in the world, another way of valuing what matters. As the evening finally began to wind down, guests reluctantly departing with genuine warmth rather than the polite efficiency of typical Anderson gatherings, I observed one final interaction that confirmed the shift in dynamics. My mother, gathering her things to leave, embraced Patricia with natural ease. "Thank you for including us in your tradition," she said warmly. "Thank you for changing it for the better," Patricia replied, surprising everyone, including herself, with the candor of the statement. "I hope this is the first of many shared holidays." Dad clapped James on the shoulder, a casual gesture that would have seemed presumptuous just hours earlier, but now felt perfectly natural. "Next Thanksgiving, you'll have to come to Seattle. Our gathering is considerably less formal, potluck style, and we invite whoever doesn't have a place to go. But what we lack in China patterns, we make up for in genuine connection." Instead of the reflexive, polite demurral I would have expected, James nodded with what appeared to be genuine interest. "That sounds refreshing, actually." As we said our goodbyes, Patricia held onto my hand a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," she said quietly, the words meant for me alone. "For not giving up on us, for persisting even when we made it difficult." "Family is worth persisting for," I replied simply. In the car on the way back to the city, my parents in the back seat and Mike driving, a comfortable silence settled around us, the kind that comes after meaningful connection rather than strained civility. "Well," Dad finally said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "That was not at all what I expected when you told us your in-laws had banned you from their Thanksgiving." Mike winced slightly. "I'm sorry about that. My family can be human," Mom supplied gently. "Your family is human, Mike, flawed and complex and capable of growth, just like all of us." "They certainly seem to evolve over the course of one dinner," Dad observed. "By dessert, your father was showing me his fishing photos and inviting me to join him on his boat next summer." Mike chuckled. "Dad hasn't invited anyone onto his precious boat in years. You must have really impressed him." "Not with my credentials," Dad pointed out. We connected over his story about catching that monster bass on Lake Michigan. Shared experiences bridge divides that achievements never can. "That's what I think your mother began to understand today," Mom added, her voice thoughtful. "That connection isn't about impressing people with what you've accomplished or who you know. It's about finding common ground as human beings." I leaned back in my seat, processing the day's unexpected turns. I never thought I'd see Patricia Anderson, questioning her social metrics, but there she was on the porch, wondering aloud when she last did something purely for joy. "Good question for anyone," Dad remarked. "What did she come up with?" "She couldn't think of anything," I admitted, which seemed to genuinely disturb her. Mom made a soft sound of compassion. "That's a difficult realization. I hope it leads her somewhere meaningful." Mike reached over to take my hand, his expression pensive. "I've been thinking about that too, about how much of my life, our life, has been structured around expectations rather than joy or meaning." "It's never too late to change course," Dad said simply. "The question is whether you have the courage to challenge the path you're on." The conversation shifted to lighter topics as we approached the city, but Dad's question lingered in my mind. Courage to challenge the established path. Wasn't that what this whole Thanksgiving drama had really been about? Not just my in-laws, acceptance of me, but a deeper question about the kind of life Mike and I wanted to build together, the values that would shape our future. We dropped my parents at their hotel with plans to meet for breakfast the next morning. As Mike and I continued to our apartment, a comfortable silence settled between us, both of us processing the transformative day in our own ways. Finally, as we pulled into our parking garage, Mike turned to me. "Your parents are amazing. You know that?" I smiled. "I do know that. But not because of their titles or achievements. Because of who they are as people," he agreed. "The way they move through the world, the way they connect with others. It's like they're free in a way my family never has been." "They are free," I confirmed. "Free from the constraints of appearances and expectations. It's how they raised me, too." Mike was quiet for a moment as he parked the car, then, still staring straight ahead. "I want that for us, Jess. That freedom, that authenticity." The simple statement carried enormous weight, an acknowledgement that the Anderson way of life, for all its privilege and polish, came with invisible constraints he was only now beginning to fully recognize. "We can have it," I said softly. "But it might mean disappointing some people, setting boundaries, making choices your family doesn't understand." "I know," he nodded. "But after today, I think my parents might be more open to a different way than I would have believed possible. And even if they're not, I need to choose us, our values, our life, over their expectations." As we rode the elevator to our apartment, I leaned my head against Mike's shoulder, profound gratitude washing through me. Not just for the shift in my in-laws' perception, though that was certainly welcome, but for this moment of alignment with my husband, this shared vision of what truly mattered. The Thanksgiving that had begun with exclusion had transformed into something entirely unexpected. An opening, a possibility, a new chapter in our family story where authenticity might finally take precedence over appearance, and where the question, "Are you our kind of people?" had been answered not with conformity, but with a gentle challenge to reconsider what our kind really meant. Christmas arrived with a light dusting of snow across Boston, transforming the city into a scene worthy of a holiday card. 6 weeks had passed since the Thanksgiving dinner that had shifted the foundation of my relationship with the Andersons. 6 weeks of subtle but meaningful changes in family dynamics, of tentative steps toward understanding, of moments that suggested transformation was possible even in relationships long defined by judgment and exclusion. "Are you sure about this?" Mike asked as we loaded the last of our luggage into the car for the drive to the airport. "We can still change our minds. Spend Christmas here, fly to Seattle for New Year's instead." I zipped up my coat against the December chill, considering his question. The plan to spend Christmas with my parents in Seattle, and more significantly, to have the Andersons join us there, had evolved from a casual invitation to a committed arrangement with surprising ease. But as our departure date approached, Mike's concerns about the extended family gathering had resurfaced. "I'm sure," I assured him, my breath visible in the cold morning air. "Everyone's tickets are booked. Mom's already preparing the guest rooms. And your mother has called me 3 times this week to confirm what to pack for casual Pacific Northwest Christmas, as she calls it." Mike laughed, though tension lingered around his eyes. "I just keep imagining my mother in her St. John knits, sitting in your parents' living room with your dad's fishing trophies and your mom's academic award plaques. Worlds colliding." "Worlds connecting," I corrected gently. "And besides, didn't your mother mention something about buying new hiking boots for the trip? People can surprise you." "True. Dad actually asked if there would be time to visit that local brewery your father mentioned." Mike shook his head in lingering disbelief. "Who are these people, and what have they done with my parents?" The drive to the airport was quick in the early morning traffic, our conversation shifting to logistics. The Anderson parents would arrive in Seattle tomorrow, giving us one day with my family before the full gathering commenced. Mike's sister Amanda had opted to join. Her newfound connection with my mother over educational philosophies having blossomed into regular phone conversations about Amanda's interest in medical school, a path Patricia had surprisingly begun to support after witnessing my mother's passion for mentoring. As we boarded our flight, I found myself reflecting on the weeks since Thanksgiving. The changes had been subtle, but significant. Patricia calling me directly rather than through Mike, inquiring about my work at the hospital with what appeared to be genuine interest. James asking Mike thoughtful questions about his teaching plans rather than dismissing them as a phase or distraction. Small adjustments in interaction that suggested shifting perspectives. Most meaningful had been the conversation when Mike formally announced his decision to accept the teaching position and reduce his hours at the family firm. We had prepared for resistance, rehearsed responses to potential criticism or manipulation. Instead, after initial concern, James had surprised us both. Your grandfather started teaching architectural theory at the extension school when he was about your age, he had revealed. The information shared not as leverage but as context. Said it kept him honest, forced him to articulate why certain approaches worked while others didn't, made him a better architect in his practice. The revelation, one of many family stories emerging now that weren't framed solely through the lens of achievement and status, had created an unexpected bridge between Mike's new path and the family legacy he had feared abandoning. The flight to Seattle passed uneventfully, both of us dozing after the early start to our day. When we landed, the familiar landscape of my childhood welcomed us. Mountains in the distance, evergreens standing sentinel against the winter sky, the particular quality of Pacific Northwest light that always felt like coming home. My parents met us at the airport, Dad's bear hug enveloping me before he clapped Mike on the shoulder with genuine affection. Mom's keen eyes assessed us both, her expression softening with approval at whatever she observed in our demeanor. "You look good," she said simply. "Both of you, more settled in yourselves." The observation was characteristic of her perceptiveness, noting not just surface appearances but the underlying shift in our relationship, the new alignment that had emerged from the challenges we'd navigated together. The drive to my childhood, home passed with easy conversation, catching up on hospital news and neighborhood developments, discussing the plans for the next few days of holiday celebration. No mention of the Andersons until we were nearly home, when Dad casually mentioned the preparations underway. "Got the guest rooms all set up," he reported. "Your mother even ordered those special towels Patricia mentioned, some brand I can't pronounce that apparently costs more than my first car." "Thomas," Mom chided gently, though amusement colored her tone. "We agreed to make them comfortable without commentary on spending habits." "Just stating facts," Dad defended good-naturedly. "No judgment intended. If fancy towels make our guests happy, I'm all for it." I caught Mike's eye in the back seat, noting his expression, a mixture of embarrassment and appreciation for my parents' efforts to accommodate his family's preferences without compromising their own straightforward approach to hospitality. My childhood home welcomed us with the familiar scent of pine from the Christmas tree occupying the front window and cinnamon from whatever was baking in the kitchen. The house was modest by Anderson standards, a comfortable 4-bedroom craftsman, style with views of the lake where I had learned to swim, but filled with the accumulated treasures of a life well lived. Books overflowing shelves, photographs documenting family adventures rather than formal portraits, Dad's fishing trophies displayed with the same prominence as Mom's academic awards. "I put you two in your old room," Mom informed me as we carried our bags inside. "I hope that's okay. We needed the guest rooms for Patricia and James, and for Amanda." "Of course it's okay," I assured her, leading Mike up the familiar stairs to the bedroom where I had spent my teenage years, now updated with a queen bed but still decorated with many of my childhood mementos. Mike surveyed the room with interest, taking in the swim team medals, the dog-eared books on the shelves. The science fair ribbons pinned to a corkboard I had forgotten still hung on the wall. "I feel like I'm getting to know teenage Jessica," he observed, picking up a framed photo of me in scrubs, clearly from a high school career shadowing day at the hospital. All these pieces of you I never knew. Does it match what you imagined? I asked, curious about how he had pictured my upbringing before seeing it firsthand. He considered this, setting down the photograph with care. It feels right, he said finally. Authentic to who you are. Not staged or curated like the bedrooms in my parents' house, where everything was chosen to create a certain impression, rather than express who we really were. The observation revealed much about the contrast in our upbringings. The Miller home designed for living, the Anderson home for displaying. It was this fundamental difference in approach to life that had underpinned so many of our marital tensions, though neither of us had fully articulated it until recently. We unpacked and joined my parents downstairs, where Dad was building a fire in the Riverstone fireplace that dominated the living room, while Mom arranged a platter of local cheeses and fruits for a light lunch. Your mother's been cooking up. A storm, Dad informed us as we settled around the kitchen island. Pretty sure she's prepared enough food to feed half the neighborhood along with the Andersons. I just want everything to be welcoming, Mom explained, though without the anxious edge that might have characterized Patricia preparing for important guests. Different, but not intimidating. I've included some traditional dishes, but nothing too exotic that might make them uncomfortable. The consideration touched me. My mother making thoughtful preparations not to impress but to connect, to create an environment where our families might find common ground despite their differences. They're going to love it, I assured her. And even if some things aren't exactly to their taste, that's part of the experience. Trying something new, stepping outside the familiar. Speaking of stepping outside the familiar, Dad interjected. James asked if we could fit in that fishing trip I mentioned. Thought we might go out tomorrow morning before Patricia and Amanda arrive in the afternoon. You game, Mike? The invitation, extended naturally to include my husband in this male bonding ritual, clearly surprised and pleased Mike. Absolutely. Though I should warn you, my fishing experience is limited to one summer camp when I was 12. Dad waved away the concern. Perfect. Nothing more satisfying than teaching someone to appreciate the quiet art of not catching anything while standing in cold water. The easy laughter that followed set the tone for the day. Relaxed, genuine, free from the performance anxiety that had characterized so many of our previous family gatherings. We spent the afternoon helping with final preparations for Christmas, stringing extra lights along the porch railings, setting up the additional leaf in the dining table to accommodate our expanded family circle, wrapping last-minute gifts. That evening, as we sat around the fireplace with mugs of Mom's homemade hot chocolate, spiked with peppermint schnapps for the adults, Mike turned to my parents with unexpected emotion in his voice. I want to thank you both, he said, the firelight casting warm shadows across his face. Not just for hosting Christmas and welcoming my family, but for showing me what family can be, what it should be. My parents exchanged a glance, one of those wordless communications that come from decades of partnership. Family isn't about perfection, Mom replied gently. It's about acceptance. Creating space where people can be fully themselves, their actual selves, not some polished version designed to maintain appearances. That hasn't been my experience until recently, Mike admitted, but I'm learning. We all learn as we go, Dad added pragmatically. Nobody gets a manual for this stuff. You just try to do better than what came before, create something that works for the people you love. The simple wisdom resonated in the quiet room, affirming the journey Mike and I had been navigating, not rejecting his family heritage entirely, but reshaping it into something that aligned more authentically with our values and vision. Morning brought light snow and the promised fishing expedition. I watched from the kitchen window as Dad demonstrated proper casting technique to Mike and James in the backyard before they headed to the lake. The three men presenting a study in contrasts. Dad in his well-worn fishing gear, James still, managing to look distinguished despite the borrowed waders. Mike somewhere in between in newly purchased but practical outdoor clothes. "They'll be fine," Mom assured me, noting my watchful gaze. "Your father has a gift for finding common ground, with anyone, and water has a way of washing away pretense." She was right, of course. When they returned hours later, earlier than planned due to increasing snowfall, something had shifted in their dynamic. James's perfect posture had relaxed, his typically reserved expression opened by genuine enthusiasm as he described the steelhead that had escaped his line. "Thomas says it was at least 20 inches, he reported to Patricia, who had arrived with Amanda while they were gone. "Got it. Right to shore before it broke free. The one that gets away is always the biggest," Dad responded with the age-old fisherman's philosophy, clapping James on the shoulder with easy camaraderie. "But you had good technique for a beginner. Natural talent." The simple compliment, offered not as social currency but as genuine acknowledgement, visibly pleased James, who straightened slightly with pride despite his still damp clothes and windblown appearance. Patricia, meanwhile, had surprised us all by arriving in jeans and a practical sweater rather than her usual designer ensemble. "Catherine advised me on appropriate attire," she explained when I commented on her outfit. "Said I'd be more comfortable if I wasn't worried about ruining good clothes with pine sap or cookie dough." The image of my mother-in-law participating in holiday baking would have been unimaginable weeks earlier, yet here she was, examining the kitchen with interest rather than assessment, asking questions about family recipes rather than inquiring about the provenance of the serving pieces. Christmas Eve unfolded with a natural rhythm, our blended family finding unexpected harmonies despite our differences. Amanda and my mother deep in conversation about medical ethics over cups of tea. Dad teaching James the finer points of building a proper fire. Patricia helping me arrange ornaments on the tree, asking thoughtful questions about the stories behind the handmade decorations that had accumulated through my childhood. "We never had ornaments like these," she admitted, carefully hanging a salt dough star I had made in 2nd grade. Our trees were professionally decorated, coordinated themes, everything matching. Beautiful, but impersonal. "That's the charm of a family tree," I offered. "It's not about the aesthetic. It's about the collection of memories, the story it tells about who you are and where you've been." She nodded slowly, fingering a faded ribbon on another homemade decoration. "I think I understand that now. There's value in imperfection when it carries meaning." The quiet admission, perhaps insignificant to an outside observer, represented a profound shift in perspective from the woman who had once deemed me unsuitable for her family's Thanksgiving table. Not a complete transformation, but an opening, a willingness to see beyond the narrow metrics that had previously defined her understanding of worth and belonging. As evening settled around us, the house glowing with candlelight and the multicolored gleam of Christmas lights, we gathered for the simple tradition of my childhood: hot cider and readings of favorite holiday stories before midnight. No formal attire or elaborate protocol, just family arranged comfortably around the fireplace, sharing the ritual of words and warmth. When James unexpectedly volunteered to read A Child's Christmas in Wales, his rich voice bringing Dylan Thomas's prose to life with unexpected emotion, I caught Mike's eye across the room. His expression mirrored my own feeling of quiet wonder at the unfolding connection between our families. So different, yet finding common ground in the simple sharing of holiday traditions. Later, as we prepared for bed in my childhood room, snow falling gently outside the window, Mike pulled me close. "Thank you," he whispered against my hair. "For what?" "For not giving up. On me, on us, on the possibility that things could change. For showing me what family can be when it's built on authenticity instead of appearances." I leaned into his, embrace, gratitude washing through me for the journey that had brought us here. From exclusion to connection, from judgment to understanding. Not a perfect resolution, real relationships never are, but a meaningful beginning to a new chapter in our shared story. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the landscape in clean white possibility, while inside, our newly expanded family slept under one roof. Different but connected, separate but belonging to each other in ways that transcended the narrow definitions that had once divided us. The Thanksgiving that had begun with rejection had opened a door to something neither family could have anticipated: a bridge between worlds, a chance to redefine what makes someone our kind of person, and the discovery that family, like the holiday table itself, always has room for one more when we open our hearts to the possibility of connection. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.